Okay, IP law workshop number 3. The focus of this workshop is really around the history of IP law and about the delicate balance we've always had to make between the interests of the IP rights holders and the rest of the community. And one thing you may be surprised from this week is that the interests of the community have featured very heavily in the past of IP law. At the moment, the public debate over IP tends to be dominated by the rights holders, and we're talking the corporate rights holders, not the artists or creators. And they spend so much money on controlling this debate that you could be forgiven to be thinking it was not another side to the debate at all. Okay, so there's this question, and it comes through in the readings of where that balance is made and how that balance is taken. The short-term limits on IP have always been there as a way of trying to limit the effects of monopolies, and we'll come back to the idea of monopolies in a second. So the focus of the preparation this week is really on the timelines. The main thing we'll be working on in the workshop is those timelines, and looking at the perspectives of the different stakeholders in there. So there's the IP creators that we hear so much about, who are all in a terrible way because of piracy. There's the consumers, and there's the publishers, who are those who actually seem to be those who have the most say in the debate. I remember at the height of the Napster controversy, The Onion published a satirical piece about the fact that 1970s artists like Elton John had starved to death because of the invention of audio tapes, quite sarcastically. And it is ironic that the debate really is about the interests of publishers and the investments of publishers, although they always do say all we care about are the artists. If they cared so much about the artists, they would probably pay them better royalties, I guess. So we're going to use a Google Doc. I think it's probably going to be the most effective way unless I can find some fantastic little web-based widget. And we'll just we can use it as a collaborative doc, and we can just start inserting, maybe do it as a table, and we can insert new times into that timeline as we go. And we're looking at 3 parallel timelines here. There's the actual media technologies, there's the controversies that occur over those, which might be a little more difficult to separate from the technologies themselves, but we'll at least put a marker in there about when each of these became controversial, and then look at what the legal response to those were. So this is a bit of history, a bit of context, and for some of you guys, I guess it's a bit of discussion of what the world was like before the internet. I'm sort of fortunate in some ways because I'm old enough to have seen both eras, and it is very hard for me to sort of look back and to think what life, just even though I have experience of what life was like before the internet, before digital technologies. Things happened a lot more slowly, I can tell you that. So one of the themes that's going to be very important is the rise and fall and rise again of the commons. The commons were once a very big deal. The idea was that, we had a society where people worked together for the common good. We've seen an attack on that throughout the 20th century, the highlight of which being, I guess, Margaret Thatcher saying there's no such thing as community, there's only individuals. But we've seen a re-emergence of that. We've seen a hopefully the high watermark of the conservative idea of individualism, although there's certainly plenty of people around today who still believe in that. But we've seen a re-emergence of this idea that the only way human beings actually get anywhere is through collaboration and cooperation, and that our laws, as part of our human systems, should do the most to optimise those things. We should be trying to... we will never get anywhere if we're just competing against each other completely. Some competition's healthy, can be useful, but not if it's at the cost of the common good. it might even surprise you that law has a fairly anti-monopoly bent. Um, Legal liberalism has been very much tied into the rise of capitalism, but it was the rise of a different sort of capitalism to what we have today. It was the kind of capitalism that believed in competition and believed that people, should be able to get rich as individuals, but it also believed in a level playing field. So a lot of and you'll see this in the readings, a lot of our ideas came from America, and they came from that sort of golden era of the American West, where it was a wild frontier, and particularly with the railway companies, a lot of people were trying to lock down monopolies. They were trying to lock down railway companies as sole providers, and lock in business around railway companies. And the law was very active to break up monopolies in those eras. So today we have a different sort of naked, greedy kind of capitalism, where people believe that if you have money, you're just entitled to make more money. But the law is still, and this is somewhere where the law being a little behind the times can be quite useful, the law is still very tied to a historical idea of capitalism and competition, where you can't use your economic power just to get more and more power to create monopolies that are anti-competitive and lock other people out of competition. So that stuff comes through very clearly through antitrust laws, and anti-competitive laws in corporations law, and we see the effect of it in IP law as well, because there is that idea that just because you own all the IP, you shouldn't be able just to gather together a bigger and bigger media empire and own everything. Unfortunately, that's happened anyway, and the number of media companies shrinks each year, and we get more and more centralisation, and Time Warner own half of the media, and or at least the entertainment media, and Disney slash Marvel slash etc. seem to own the other half. So we are seeing in some ways a failure of those anti-monopoly laws. It doesn't mean they're not important. So that's something that I think it's not just of historical interest, but I think it's important we keep this alive in the debates over IP law, because all too often it just turns into well, if I own it, I can do what I like with it, and that's not the way the law sees things. Also relevant to this week is that obviously that idea of evolving technologies, and the big one that we need to talk about is digitisation. Huge impact, and one that's very easy to forget about because we're so used to things just being digital files, and the idea that you can send someone a picture or a song or a movie via the internet. You can capture something on a mobile device like a phone and send it to somewhere else. The convergence of those media technologies under the digital umbrella is enormous. And it wasn't that long ago that a photo was a photo, and it was something you took with a photographic device. You took it away to the chemists, and you waited a week for it to get developed before it came back, and you found out you had your finger over the lens all the time, and it didn't work. That a book or an article was something you typed on a typewriter. And if you wanted to make a copy of it, you had to make a photocopy of it. If you wanted to send it to someone around the world, you had to stick it in an envelope or fax it. The digitisation of media has meant that everything suddenly is easily transportable and also easily copied. And this is a change we're culturally yet to catch up with, and we're definitely legally yet to catch up with. We've changed the laws so that we've modified them to try and preserve the effects and to include digital technologies, but we don't necessarily think about what that actually means. So one example, I guess, is sharing of music. And we're probably ahead of the field in music in understanding what that sharing actually means. And we went from the early days where it was like, it's just stealing. All it is stealing. Today, where we're sort of thinking about how, in many ways, copying of digital music can be beneficial to artists, particularly new and emerging artists, are letting people copy their their music, because the real money tends to be tied up with merchandising. And there's an interesting video we'll look at later in the course that basically says if you're in a new and emerging band, give your music away, but sell your T-shirts. So that's interesting, and that's things that are emerging now, that are changing at the moment. So digitisation's a big issue, and one of the parts of that, which is something that we look at briefly this week, because I was unsure where else to put it, is anti-circumvention laws. So these are laws that not only regulate the breach of IP, but they regulate the technologies that allow that breach. So it's primarily, and I think completely, in the field of copyright, not in the other areas of IP law. And the attempt was made really to try and criminalise the ability or the knowledge of how to copy. And it was a big, in the early 2000s, it was a big scary issue. There was the passage of, in Australia, it was the Digital Agenda Copyright Amendments. In America, they called them the Digital Millennium Amendments. Why we called it the Digital Agenda in Australia, I'm not quite sure. Apart from the fact that I think the government was suspicious of the digital agenda, that there was some kind of secretive conspiracy of the digital world out there to get us. But apart from that, as usual, because of our restrictions under the free trade agreements, we just immediately stepped up and copied the American amendments. And at the time, it looked like the amendments were going to criminalise a whole lot of things, including things like having a CD burner, having the physical, technical means of copying a CD, or being in a business who sold those technologies. And there was a whole lot of debate, which has sort of disappeared now, around encryption and decryption technologies, and prosecution of people who published decryption code. And it was a fairly scary time, because we had a point where we were criminalising knowledge. We weren't criminalising people for things they did wrong, but for things they knew how to do. And from a civil liberties perspective, that's a kind of a shocking thing. Now, there's been less of that now. The debate has shifted, and this is probably something that's more of an e-law topic than ours, because it's really more about piracy and Pirate Bay and all the rest of it. But I bring this up here just to remind us, it's a good place to put this, that there has been some changes within the copyright laws, that we not only have the potential to penalise people for wrongdoing, but also for having the means to implement wrongdoing. So it's a bit like, instead of being able to charge someone with burglary, charging someone because they have a ladder, and the ladder means that they might be able to be a burglar and break into someone's house, or owning a crowbar or something like that. So from a legal philosophical perspective, there's some very kind of interesting arguments there. So okay, that's the gist of what we're going to talk about this week, and hopefully it'll be an interesting exercise for us all.